Welcome to the Lady Up America podcast. I'm Diane Canada, your host, and I am so glad you're here today. Ladies, today we are going to have a very, very hot topic we're going to be covering. Today's show is entitled One Nation Above God. Be right back.
Lady up around this town. Lady up around this town. Victory on the battleground. We claim it now. Lady up, lady up. Lady up, lady up.
All right, ladies, welcome back. I can't wait to introduce you today to my very dear friend, Stephen Skelton. He's making headlines both here in Tennessee and also across our country. Why? Because he is putting the first American Bible back into the schools. Imagine that. Not only that, but into the hands of our legislators, both at the state level, across lots of states, and also at the congressional level. Well, that stirred up a lot of progressives out there. They don't like it. Just this past month, there was a big article in the Tennessean, which is our main newspaper here. And the name of the article was Tennessee Endorsed Aitken Bible Tied to National Movement to Erode Church and State. I know that a lot of us struggle with this whole idea of separation between church and state. We're going to be covering that today. How dare he put the Bible in hands of legislators? How dare we put it back in the schools? Have we outgrown God? Are we above God in our culture now? Well, let's talk about it. Please welcome to the show, Stephen Skelton.
Diane, thanks so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here. I am so excited about this show today because we're going to probably ruffle some feathers, but I hope that the ladies will walk away today with a clear understanding of what it is we're doing. How does that work in government, and how do we talk about that among our friends? So, what have you done to get everybody so upset?
I didn't think it was that big a deal. All we're doing is we're taking the first American Bible, which is also called the Aitken Bible, and we're putting it into schools as a historical document. It illustrates topics that the teachers are already teaching when they talk about the American Revolution. So here on the table in front of us, we actually have an original first American Bible.
Okay, ladies, this book, this actual copy of I'm scared to touch it, precedes 5 years, precedes the Constitution. It is that old.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, it is a founding document of America. An original founding document of America. And the way that we actually have this Bible here is that when the American Revolution began, America stopped trade with Britain. When we stopped trade with Britain, among the many products we stopped receiving from Britain were Bibles.
Yeah.
And so the first printer for the Journals of Congress was a man named Robert Aitken, and Robert Aitken sought to print the first American Bible. It is the first English Bible made in America, in American history, and also the only Bible approved by Congress.
Yeah, that's the key. Okay, so this is what's going to get us in the deep water today. Approved by Congress. Okay, so Great Britain had cut us off from Bibles. They said, y'all aren't getting any more Bibles. We're running out of them. We're starting to populate. So Robert Aitken, he's already been known to Congress for printing so many of our famous documents, and now they've commissioned him to print this first American Bible.
In fact, it was Aitken's idea. So what happened was Aitken was the very first printer for the Journals of Congress, which means he's the guy that preserved the Declaration of Independence in type. So that gave him a foot in the door with our founders, and he wrote him a letter, and he asked for their approval to publish the first American Bible. So he sought their approval. They approved it and recommended that all Americans read it. And then Aitken printed 10,000 copies. Today, there's only 25 left in the world.
And you have one.
And we have one.
I am just blown away that we're sitting here with that. I mean, I love history. I know so many of you do too. But to actually have the first American Bible at our table right here, right. What an honor. And then this is a replica.
That's right. And these are the replicas that we put into schools. So we're the keepers of an original first American Bible, which we brought back into print so that we can put this historical document back into schools.
How dare you, Stephen? How dare you do this? Now, okay. So from the historical perspective, when they're teaching on the Revolutionary War, this is why it is relevant to that teaching. Right. Okay, but in this headline, in this article that was printed, I mean, they came after you for this, and they're saying you're trying to erode church and state. All right, now, what if we just took a hard left here for a second? What if we, as a country, if we just gave in, as us as Christians, we just laid down our weapons on this spiritual battleground and we just said, okay, progressives, you've outgrown God. You're above God now. You're your own God now. Nobody's going to tell you what to do, how to live your life, all that. If the Christians just laid down the fight and we had a nation gone under, as Ronald Reagan so famously said, or we think we're above God at this point, what would a nation look like?
Well, first off, it would look like a vacuum.
Yeah.
And something would have to rush in to fill that vacuum. What I'm saying is that if we did walk away from our history, and our history clearly indicates that our founders were people that believed in a faith influence on government, that their faith would lay at the foundation of the laws they were building, of the nation that they were building.
Yeah.
If we took that away, we would take the foundation out from underneath us. It would create this vacuum. Something would rush in to fill that vacuum. And that's what keeps me up at night.
Yes, yes. Which is why I know you're so motivated to do this. You know, what is it about the founding values of our country that is so upsetting? I was thinking about this, ladies, like, you know, God's values, when they say, oh, our country was not founded on Christian values, I mean, obviously this is proof sitting here that it was. But let's just entertain it for a second. Let's just entertain their viewpoint for a few minutes. What is it about the Christian values that has them so, why are they so adverse? It's the fruit of the Spirit. So it's patience, kindness, goodness, peace, self-control, joy, love. I don't know anything about that would be, if we removed that. And then the 10 Commandments. So we go through the 10 Commandments, and you should serve no other God but me. If they want to be their own God, then that's kind of, it's inconvenient. You know, you want to honor your mother and your father. Well, we see so many people not doing that nowadays. Kids really being torn from their parents. I mean, we just went down the list of the commandments. So
don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal,
don't kill. I mean, yes. I mean, so what is it about all of that they find so horrifying?
I think it's that we would prefer to have our laws based on our own philosophy. We don't want our laws based on God's laws. The problem with that, of course, is that without a higher moral authority that everyone can point to, it then becomes a he said, or she said, in terms of what defines all of these great principles that we're built upon. What defines freedom? If I say it's one thing and you say it's another.
Exactly. Who's
what
the umpire?
defines justice? If I say it's one thing and you say it's another.
Right.
What defines punishment? If I say it's one thing and you say it's another.
Exactly.
So at any rate, I think what they don't like is being told what to do.
Yes. At the end of the day, I think that's what it comes down to, don't you?
Yes.
They want to be their own God. It's pride. Yeah. I want to be my own God. I don't want anybody telling me how to live my life. Well, you know, when we just look at liberty, we just look at, okay, the difference. How would you define like the difference between liberty and freedom?
Sure. Yes. The difference between liberty and freedom then is that both, in fact, to talk about what they have in common, both, in fact, are blessings.
Right.
This is what Thomas Jefferson told us. Thomas Jefferson said that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence. By the way, if you look at that other founding document, the Constitution, which we're told constantly doesn't have any kind of a Christian influence to it, in the preamble, you find the phrase, the blessings of liberty.
Right.
So we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice and secure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. To ourselves and our posterity do ordain and establish this Constitution. If we're wondering what blessings of liberty means, well, there's a fairly well-established method of discerning the meaning in a document if you have a previous document that's of the same class. Well, the Declaration and the Constitution are both of the same class. So we're wondering what the Constitution means by the blessings of liberty. And as I just quoted, we find in the Declaration that Jefferson told us we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yes.
So it is that blessing of liberty by the Creator we're endowed with it by that the Constitution is actually referring to. The evidence that we are a foundation of godly principles at the the very beginning, the very start of our nation should be obvious to anyone that takes the 5 minutes to look at the preamble of the Constitution and look at the opening of the Declaration.
Yeah. We get pushbacks when any time that any of us talk about our founding being biblically based, we get these pushbacks of, church and state. And I think a lot of women who have been listening to me for a while, we've talked about this on programs before, but I think it would be great. You always phrase this so perfectly. Explain where that term separation between church and state came from and how it applies now.
Sure. Where it kind of is popularly harkened back to is a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1802 to the Danbury Baptist Association. The Danbury Baptist Association had written to Jefferson to say, we're concerned the government is going to infringe upon our religious liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And to that, Jefferson replied, you don't have to worry. After all, there's a separation between church and state. So what he was saying there was, there's a hedge of protection that surrounds the church that the government cannot infringe upon.
Mm-hmm.
So he was telling the church that they were safe. He wasn't saying anything about no godly influence on government. That is not what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
He was not saying that there should not be a faith influence on government. He was simply telling the church that they were safe from government intrusion.
So we think about our founding fathers set our country up with these freedoms and these liberties as a blessing, understanding that they came from our Creator, that God gives us our rights, not government. And they were fleeing religious tyranny. So a lot of the arguments that the progressives make now around this just really kind of fall flat, because our founding fathers they knew that we weren't a perfect union yet. We were working toward that. We aspired to these certain goals that we had in our country. And a lot of people will say things like, slavery, how would we allow slavery? Slavery was perfectly normal in those days and has been for centuries. We were one of the first countries to ever aspire to change that, laying the foundation for everyone to have those inalienable rights.
Right.
And so, yes, when we're talking about faith versus religion, and you and I have had this in private discussions, I'd love for you to share it with the ladies, that there's a very big difference. When we have our money saying in God we trust, and we have in God we trust over our judges in our courtrooms and all of that, explain how that dichotomy works between religion and faith, just based on everything I was just kind of saying.
Sure, absolutely. That's one of the word games that folks play today, perhaps not even realizing that they're playing it. They'll say separation of church and state. What they mean is separation of faith and state.
Right.
Those are two completely different things.
Yes.
If we said the separation of church and state means that, in practical terms, the government cannot establish a church, and if you go to their church, you get a tax break. And if you don't go to their church, you get a tax penalty. We would say that truly is what we mean by a separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the First Amendment means when it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they mean.
Mm-hmm.
However, that's not what we mean today when we say it. What we mean today is that separation of faith and state, so that we don't want a faith influence being brought to bear if our judges are deciding a case. We don't want a godly influence on that.
Mm-hmm.
Neither do we want a godly influence on a politician when he's casting a vote. We don't want a godly influence. Now, whatever is supposed to replace that godly influence in the life of that individual who has developed their moral compass based on a Judeo-Christian ethic, I have no idea what that's supposed to be.
Exactly. What on earth would they base right or wrong on? One of the arguments that I have a lot when I encounter atheists, is this whole idea. I mean, if you think about it, atheists have so much more faith than they even realize. I mean, the ability to believe in these things. But this pushback, like when they'll judge and say, well, it's just not right that you're pushing your religion on me. What makes it not right? Like, what are you basing your moral compass on? I love Matt Kokel and, those guys who put out those questions where the apologetics, where they're really debating these atheists. But it's just interesting to see them kind of backpedal when you start posing questions like that. It's like, what exactly are you basing your right or wrong on, if not God?
Right, exactly. Which that's what I was saying about kind of the weather vane of opinion. Because if we don't have that higher moral authority,
yes,
we really are cast to the wind, whichever way it tends to be blowing. And worse, you're a weather vane and I'm a weather vane.
Yeah.
So I'm blowing this way and you're blowing that way. And maybe on Monday, you decide what is compassionate, but on Tuesday, I decide what is compassionate.
Yeah.
Or as I said before, what is legal or what is justice or what is right and wrong.
It's very scary to think about a world, America, without God. Just kind of going back to that idea of being above God. That whole, oh my gosh, Stephen, I'm so taken back by the arguments that I hear from the left around this subject, when they can be so cruel and callous. And when we talk about liberty, it's like, if you're going to be your own God, and like you were just saying, if you're going to say that it's okay for me to beat my wife and kill her, because that's what we do in my religion. Like, there are religions that allow that. If she steps out of line or whatever, they're allowed to do that. But this person says, no, that's wrong. If you even so much as touch her, lay a hand on her, that's considered wrong. Who's the umpire? Like, who is the umpire? So we have to have one moral compass we can go by in America, or it's unsustainable. Like, what do we have if we let all of these weather vanes play out? All these weather vanes just blow randomly. Do we have anarchy eventually?
We certainly would. There is no doubt that there are competing philosophies that are at battle. They contradict one another, so they can't really cooperate fully with each other because they've got some bedrock differences. That's why it's important to do your civic duty. It is important that you vote your values.
Can people have a moral compass and values without a higher authority?
They certainly can. They certainly can adhere to the same principles. They can be kind, they can be loving, they can care about their children as much as anybody else could care about their children, for example, in daily. They could value fidelity within a marriage the same as anyone else that's not a Christian could value fidelity in their marriage. But the problem becomes that when push comes to shove and they are in a compromised position, there has to be a higher moral authority. This is what our founders knew. There had to be a higher moral authority to judge ultimately what's right and what's wrong, and not leave it up to the individual that is making these kind of conditional arrangements with his own morality.
Emotions are so fleeting. They change so rapidly. And we can't, like, the thing that I love about biblical values is, and this was a distinction that I realized recently, is that in God's economy, in God's way of doing things, your behavior leads. When God gives us that definition in I think it's 1 Corinthians about, love is patient, love is kind, all these things. I realized recently that those are behavioral. Those are not, they have nothing to do with feelings. So in God's, when we're walking with the Lord, we understand that behavior comes first, and then your feelings will catch up. With the left, this above God kind of mentality that we have now, it's your feelings lead and your behavior then follows.
True. I don't think in American culture, in our history, we've ever seen a culture that values feelings more than right now.
Right? I know.
And the feelings are even weaponized, which is to say that people will manipulate your feelings. They'll present you with provocative issues or controversial issues or topics in order to get you fired up to either get your vote or get your money. What they don't want is critical thinking about these topics or controversial issues. Putting the Bible back in school is an excellent example in the world that I live in. And doing that, putting the Bible back in school, we find that people have this kind of emotional reaction based upon their own personal experience or aversion to religion. And they assume that if this book is brought up, it must be a Sunday school lesson. It must be a devotional application. Well, that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is a historical application, but because of their feelings, it takes them a while to calm down enough to think rationally about the application that's actually being made to put the Bible into schools.
Now let's take a departure for just a minute. For people who've got a lot of church hurt, for people who we've seen over history, you're a wonderful historian. We've seen over history that quote unquote Christians have been at the forefront of some of the biggest atrocities in our world. And so I understand some of the hesitation with people about, bringing religion into the public square again, or even faith into the public square again. How do we reconcile that in America? The fact that the way I would reconcile it is people hurt people, but God stays the same.
Right.
You know, I would love your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the reason that I mentioned Congress approved it and also recommended that we read it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anybody that's actually pointed back to the Gospels to actually read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John will come away with an understanding that anytime you see an abuse of fellow men, that is not gospel.
Mm-hmm.
That is not biblical. That is not instruction that we should follow in our lives that we would derive from this book right here.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that it does harken back to that idea of critical thinking,
Mm-hmm.
informed critical thinking. Inform yourself. Actually read the book, as opposed to just say, well, the headline is that, you know, the Christians are abusing this issue or that issue. Well, if they are in fact abusing this issue or that issue, that doesn't come from the book. That doesn't come from the Gospels.
Mm-hmm. Human nature doesn't change. God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Human beings are we're in a fallen world where we have a sin nature. Our default is to be selfish and to be self-gratifying and to be. I mean, when people talk about socialism and Marxism, that never plays out well,
Right.
ever, because human beings are flawed. We are very flawed, and so without God, when we come into that relationship with God, then He starts to, you know, mold us into more and more of His image. And we turn more and more into people who I think your want to is what changes. So if we know that there is an audience, like I always say, I live for an audience of one. If we know God's watching, we know that He's watching when nobody else is. People are going to make different decisions, but they're going to want to. It's not going to be this, you know, oppressive kind of, you know, mean God's going to strike me down dead today if I don't do this. It's you want to be good to your neighbor. You that when you understand love and you understand what that actually looks like to walk that out, that behavioral aspect of walking that out, it's a beautiful thing. But I understand church hurt. I understand my father was a pastor when I was growing up, and he walked out on my family, and it took us a long time to come back to the church. But I had to realize he was a flawed human being and he made a bad decision, but it's not God's fault.
Right.
You know?
No, it's not. It gets back to what you said just a moment ago, which is that selfishness is inherited in all of us.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do want to say that the door would swing both ways. If we were trying to make the case that Christians throughout history in various campaigns and crusades have committed these atrocities, well, we could say that's not Christianity practiced correctly. And the same could be
Right.
true of socialist and Marxist regimes,
Mm-hmm.
which have also killed millions of people.
Yes.
And if we said to a Marxist, that's what you are all about, they would say, no, that's not Marxism practiced correctly. So it is not just the Christians
Right.
that see their own failing. It's all people. But that's because selfishness is inherent in human nature.
That's a great point. So not that we're endorsing Marxism in any way. You and I were recently talking, and you said something that I thought was very compelling. The difference between government endorsing versus enforcing. Can you speak on that for just a minute?
Oh, sure, absolutely. This is part of the feelings over everything. People think that an endorsement, a spoken word of support, must somehow force them into doing anything. It may hurt their feelings, but it doesn't force them to do anything for the government to endorse even a religious message. How do I know that? Well, because this past Easter, the Biden administration wished me a happy Easter through X. They did a little tweet out there and they were wishing them. Now, at the same time, on the same day, they also endorsed Trans Day of Visibility.
Oh, that was controversial.
It was controversial. But my point is, they've got two messages coming from the same source.
Mm-hmm.
One is what you might call a secular message,
Mm-hmm.
Trans Day of Visibility being supported or endorsed. And the other is Easter, a religious holiday, also being endorsed. They didn't force anyone to do anything. Just because they were endorsing Transgender Day of Visibility did not mean that you were forced to actually participate. Just because they were endorsing Easter also did not mean that you were forced to participate. So in fact, the government is free to endorse a religious message, just the same as they're free to endorse any message. to draw a distinction between endorsing Transgender Day of Visibility and endorsing Easter, and to say that this one, because it's secular, is correct, and this one is incorrect, is to invite religious discrimination. Because the reason that you would say this one, celebrating Easter, is incorrect is because it's a religious topic. But again, the government is free to endorse anything. They're just not free to enforce anything.
It. And therein lies the subtle distinction. So, Stephen, as we're starting to see the fruits of this secularism playing out in our country right now, I am very encouraged to see a lot of people of faith really being a lot more bold about that faith and coming back into the public square and saying, no, we're not going to, because in a way that secularism is a religion in and of itself, pushing these ideals and these, if you want to call them their values, wouldn't even refer to them as values, but pushing those ideologies on us and our children. That is, and enforcing that. Like you were just saying, there's an enforcement that's going on that is completely against what we believe. So it is a religion in so many ways. But I do see people of faith pushing back. And there was a famous quote that I love that says, the only thing that is necessary for evil to flourish is for good men to do nothing. And so I do see people, good men and women, stepping forward and being a lot more bold about their faith. Are you seeing that? I mean, are you seeing that too in your walk every day?
Sure, absolutely. So the article comes out and it says that the fact that in our history we have a Bible approved by Congress is somehow proof that because we're talking about that, we're trying to erode this separation of church and state there. Some people were making that argument. Certainly the article was making that argument. However, online, as the comments began to come in, you actually found many people pushing back against that and saying, it's almost as if you're saying, this is our history and we're mad about that. Well, it is our history.
I mean, this book right here is proof. They just hate it. I really hate that for them.
It's our history.
It's our history. What is it? Facts are the facts. They're so great to say that. I mean, how do you dispute this?
Right, exactly. And you should not cover up this piece of history any more than you should cover up any other piece of history.
Right.
Sometimes you'll hear from one political side or the other political side saying that, well, you're trying to cover up our history. You're trying to disguise this part of history. And that is, once again, a door that swings both ways.
Yes.
No, we shouldn't be covering up any history, including the godly heritage of the country.
That's right.
Clearly demonstrated by this artifact physically sitting here on the table in front of us.
Yeah.
The only Bible approved by Congress, the only Bible recommended to Americans by the American government.
And recommended why? Because it was the way to self-govern so that the government would not have to come in and overreach.
Yes. And also, in agreement with that, I also say that they wanted you to read it. I mean, if you think about it, if someone recommends you go to a restaurant, they're recommending the food. Right. They're recommending the meal. Yeah. They're recommending you participate. So if someone recommends a book, they're recommending that you read it.
Yeah. Fancy concept there. So we are, thank God, one nation under God still. They're trying to change that. We are not going to sit back and let that happen. We are not ever above God. All right, ladies, we have to use our voices. That's what it's all about here in Lady Up America. Thank you so much, Stephen, for being with me.
Thank you for having me
in the studio today. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. So they can find out more and actually get a replica of this Bible, help you put it in schools. FirstAmericanBible.org.
That's right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you guys are ever able to catch Stephen out at an event and you have the opportunity to come and see this original Aitken Bible, I mean, I felt like I was just holding the most rare diamond. It is. I mean, the Bible is the most precious book, and to actually hold our first American Bible today, what an honor. Thank you for letting me do that. Make sure you come and see him if you can. But this replica here is the one that's going back in the school. So help him do that. Let's make sure that we just let everybody know. Christians, we are using our voices and we are taking a stand for God in our country. We are not going to let this vacuum happen. We are not going to let this evil flourish. All right, ladies, I also want to invite you to join us for our Lady Up America book club. I'm so excited about this. This is a way that you can help me train Christian moms for the toughest spiritual battleground of our lifetime. Go to ladyupamerica.com. All the information is there, but it's just you raising your hand and saying, I will invite 5 of my girlfriends into my living room, ones that hold a Christian worldview. We will work through the Lady Up America book together. We give you a study guide. We hold your hand through it all. But you will help me train up more moms to be able to take this stand for our country, to take this stand for God. And then those 5 go and hold a book club of their own, and we can just loaves and fishes this out into our community and make massive impact this election season. So go to ladyupamerica.com, sign up to host a book club, and I can't wait to walk alongside of you and fight the good fight. Once again, Stephen Skelton, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, thanks for bringing this, and we will see you next time. Lady up.
Lady up around this town. Lady up around